Final Fantasy X originally came out in 2001, making this year the 20th anniversary of its release. Final Fantasy X itself is a very special game to me. It's definitely in my top 10 video games of all time, so on this very special day, I'll be going through why I love this game so much. I think a great place to start will be my history of the Final Fantasy franchise. So back in early 2019, when I was still serving in the army, I wanted to play a very long video game because I was so bored in camp. So I ended up with the mobile version of Final Fantasy VI, since it was a rather meaty JRPG that can last up to 30 hours or so. Ever since I finished 6, I became a huge fan of the whole franchise, subsequently picking up FF7 and 9 on the Switch eShop once they were on sale. I would go to finish FF7 in late 2019, and once again it was just an incredible experience, easily beating my time with 6. The key thing to note here is that there are always people debating which Final Fantasy game is the best, and I'll often see 6, 7 or 9 in contention. 10 on the other hand, not a lot of people seem to think that way. 10 is often described as the last great Final Fantasy game, but never any more than that. I'll end up constantly buying the HD Remaster version while shopping at the retail chain, and there you'll sit on my shelf for many months untouched, collecting dust. I had no intention of playing it as I didn't really want to play an inferior Final Fantasy game where I could be playing something else like FF9. Fast forward to 2020, I was so damn hyped to play through Final Fantasy VII Remake on a PS4. However, we all know what happened last year. The pandemic struck and there was a circuit breaker period, which meant that I couldn't go to the retail shop to pick up my pre-ordered copy of FF7R. I had to patiently wait another 2 weeks for it to get shipped to my house. So at that time, I wanted to fill the void of a Final Fantasy game while I waited for FF7R to ship, especially since I had to now spend a full week in camp. So this was where this game came to the equation. I finally gave this game a shot, and in just a single week while I was in camp, I finished the game. I had very low expectations coming to the game, since like I said earlier, I already heard so much stuff about this game through social osmosis. Of course, top of the list is the memey, infamous Tidus love scene, which made me think the game is going to have a very happy-go-lucky, cheesy protagonist and an underwhelming story. However, it actually turned out to be my favourite Final Fantasy story to date. The story primarily takes place in the world of Spira, and this particular setting is so unique. There's elements of medieval fantasy sprinkled around, but at the same time, it's kind of futuristic as well with tons of technological advancements. It really lends itself a unique identity, not just from Final Fantasy games, but games in general. Aside from a unique setting, the characters featured are also written really well. In particular, I would like to talk about the protagonist of the story, Tidus. From the very first cutscene, it's clear that the plot will be mainly told from Tidus' perspective, as he slowly recounts the incident leading up to that point.
Listen to my story.
I really like this storytelling approach, as we get to hear from Tidus' own monologues throughout the entire game without it sounding very strange, while also adding character flavour and depth. And in some situations, it also adds an element of foreshadowing, which gets the amazing payoffs later on in the story. The setup of the story is that Tidus is mysteriously transported into the world of Spira, away from his home in Zanarkand. This new strange world is unlike the world where Tidus came from. As such, a lot of the norms and customs are foreign to him. Thus, Tidus is kind of like a vessel to players, acting as our eyes and ears, while also providing a fresh point of view only an outsider like Tidus can provide. I see a lot of hate comments regarding Tidus as a character. Adjectives like cringy, crybaby, immature, hot-headed are often thrown around. I can definitely see where they are coming from, but personally I really like Tidus as a character. I can absolutely relate to his plight and emotions throughout all the game's story beats. He really resonated with me unlike any other protagonist I played up to this point. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I often felt like an outsider myself, and many people think I'm just a childish kid. So I felt very connected with him, and it was very satisfying seeing his character growth through the story different arcs. Of course, there's the other lead, Yuna, who is also an amazing character that is very well realised and executed. And this is important as much of the focal point of the whole journey revolves around her. She's really just a well-rounded character that goes through a ton of character development, and almost all her scenes are very memorable, be it scenes depicting her struggles or just goofy-ass scenes. The party cast characterization is also absolutely on point. They all have very deep backstories, beliefs and motivation backing out their actions throughout the entire game. And these were all fleshed out really well in the main story, side content and exploration. The interaction between them and the tribulations are very well earned, with many outstanding story beats and plot points. There aren't really any weak characters to speak of, all of them have significant character development. I think this may be the best party cast in any JRPGs, up there with the likes of Dragon Quest XI. And with these amazing characters, the story was able to create so many emotionally charged scenes. If you ask any Final Fantasy X fan which was the best part of the plot, there will be so many memorable moments to choose from. For me personally, without going to spoilers, out of all the memorable scenes, I would say it was the pre-fight scene with a very strong confrontation just before a boss fight right around the third quarter mark of the game. That one scene legit gave me goosebumps, and the events building up to that one scene is so good. Another reason why I love the story of Final Fantasy X is due to the narrative themes it manages to deliver, such as grief, racism, religion, blind faith, cycle of death, taking charge, family. And the plot manages to convey these themes in a coherent manner really nicely. And I think part of the reason why the plot managed to deliver is due to the game being very linear. Unlike the previous Final Fantasy games, 10 does not have an overworld map. You just sort of travel from places to places in a linear way. Even the towns and fields are generally one big walkway with not much diverting path. And while it may sound kind of bad on paper, I really think the story benefited from this linear approach. The pacing just feels so much better. There's always a constant emphasis on the story and interaction, which kept the game going at a very nice pace. Narrative wise, it also fits. After all, your party is on a pilgrimage, you're not really supposed to backtrack and whatnot. It's supposed to be a long journey with a clear destination. And this feeling of a long journey was especially prevalent as I got closer to the finale. It was a very complicated feeling, where by the end I felt happy that this long journey has finally come to a close, but yet sad that this long journey has to come to an end. The ending is also truly magnificent and beautiful, just a great ending to a 40 hours well-paced story. In terms of gameplay, Final Fantasy X also marks quite a departure away from previous games in the series. As mentioned in the context section, I've only played 6 and 7 before 10, and both of those games utilize the ATB Active Time Battle System. It's a battle system where you can only choose your options when your bar fills up, and you have to choose your options rather quickly, as time flows for your enemies as well. In this game however, the battle system is referred to as conditional turn-based battle system, where all the actions of the party and enemies are shown in a list format. The number of turns you get and the sequence of turns are affected by the agility stat, so this means that the number of turns each unit get is not equal. So a unit with high agility like Riku can find herself having multiple turns in a row or just more turns in general. Also, certain actions and status effect can also affect the turn orders. While speed and turn manipulation were also present in the previous games, the fact that you can take your time to select your options and you can visibly see the turns changing in front of your eyes really adds a lot more to the tactical feel of the game. Another big change that drastically improves the battle system is the fact that you can switch party members in and out of battle without any penalty. One of my biggest pet peeve in Final Fantasy VII is the fact that you can only use 3 party members at one time and the rest of your party just get to do nothing. It gets to a point where there are just too many party members and not enough slots to let them be useful in battle. In this game however, every single character in your party is all useful and important. They each have a knack for dispatching different types of enemies while also providing different forms of utility. They are basically callbacks to familiar Final Fantasy classes with a few twists here and there. For example, you have Lulu, which fits the Black Mage class who is potent at casting elemental attacks. Waka, which fits the Archer class with great accuracy, capable of dispatching flying enemies. And Tidus, which fits the Warrior class while also having spells from the Time Mage class. It's very obvious that they designed it this way to make you constantly switch party members in and out to tackle each enemy type. And throughout the game, it never ever got old as you constantly switch out your party formations to try out each combo. It really adds a dynamic feeling to each battle that is not found in the previous games. Another interesting change is done to the summons. In previous games, using summons is basically just another glorified attack or spell with a very elaborate cutscene. In this game however, wherever you summon an Aeon as Yuna, that particular summon becomes a temporary party member with options and moves available. They stay on the battlefield until they either fall in battle or you dismiss them. I really like this summon system a lot as there are tons of different applications in using them in battle. A lot of the boss battles are won and lost due to these guys right here. And really the boss battles are where this battle system really gets to shine. Most bosses are very challenging. They are designed like puzzles with a set strategy to wipe out your party, such as using specific status effect coupled with attacks that really benefit from inflicting said status effect. Some bosses will have multiple targets, forcing you to correctly focus on the right target. Towards the later portion of the game, many of the bosses will also have multiple phases. They can hit you twice in a row, and they can also one-shot you if certain conditions are met. It can certainly feel a little unfair at times, especially when you continuously die in a single turn. It gets to a point where even wasting a single turn can spell doom. But when you finally manage to come up with a great strategy and when you execute it in battle, it always feels great to finally take them down. The character progression is also handled way differently compared to the earlier games. At the center of character progression is the spear grid system. As you defeat enemies in battle, you'll slowly gain enough points to move through the spear grid, where you can then unlock the nodes available on each of them. This will be the only way for you to actually increase the stats and gain extra moves and abilities. Just now I said that each party member has their own strengths and weaknesses, well that's only true if you went with the standard spear grid, where each party member has their own designated area so they can focus on different abilities. In this remaster port, they've included an international exclusive expert spear grid, where all party members start out at the center of the grid, granting you the freedom to dictate each of their roles more freely. This spear grid system is certainly unique. It gives players some semblance of customization as you plan your routes and path. The level of customization can be increased further with unique nodes that allows you to travel outside of your designated area. Generally, I find that I'm quite lukewarm to the whole system overall. It definitely feels different from other JRPGs, where usually you'll feel a steady power spike as you level up and see your base stats constantly going up. The power spikes feel more extreme in Final Fantasy X. You'll mostly be walking towards certain spells and abilities. I guess it can be quite motivating seeing how close you are towards a specific node. Another byproduct of this change is that grinding or not will not really help you in difficult bosses, as stats gains and abilities learned are not really linear with the amount of experience you get. So I view that as an absolute win. That basically means a good strategy is more important than just over leveling. The other way to customize your party is through equipment. This time round the equipment has been greatly simplified, even more so than Final Fantasy VII. You only get to choose one weapon and one armor, but the rest of the customization takes place within the gear itself. Some of the gears have empty slots, which you can actually choose to fill them up with the exchange of some key items. This is a very important mechanic, as other than just increasing stats, you can pick certain special effects to accompany the gear. For example, as previously mentioned, some bosses like to throw status effect at you, for example silence. So you might want to customize and put a silence proof gear on to counteract that play. And I feel this is better than other Final Fantasy games, since if you are deep in a dungeon, you can't necessarily make a trip to a town to buy some accessory for the boss right there. But over here, you can just go to your menu and customize it right there. And although it's nice to stack all the great effects on a single gear, you'll be giving up on a lot of rare items in the process, which may not be that worth it after all. Having only played Final Fantasy VI and VII before the game, I have to say I'm very impressed with the graphics. I think the art style definitely still holds up in 2021, especially the use of colours. I really like how vibrant the whole game looks. The development team has stated that they were inspired by Asian locales like Thailand and the South Pacific, and it's very obvious to see that inspiration getting translated here. I really dig the whole tropical island aesthetic, as well as the Asian culture inspired building designs like the temples, which all felt so fresh, especially coming from the steampunk setting found in FF6 and 7. Speaking of FF7, this game will also mark the first time where the background is fully rendered in real time, unlike the pre-rendered background in the PS1 era. This obviously helped in making certain scenes more cinematic than the PS1 Final Fantasy games, where this time round the camera is free to move around the scene versus just static camera angles. Since this is a 20-year-old game, there are certainly some aging elements present, even in this remaster which updated many textures and models. The most obvious one being the rough animations. It's just not as smooth as games that are made today. It can be quite distracting in certain scenes. There are also some problems with the faces and hairs, and some clipping issues still persist. Under the audio presentation, this game will also mark the first time a Final Fantasy game is almost fully voice acted. Despite many people's opinion that the voice acting is straight trash, I genuinely find that it was good. Like of course, it's not the best voice performance I heard in a video game, but it didn't actively ruin my enjoyment of the story, and in most scenes I think the voice acting added a lot to the feels. My only complaint is that the timing and pacing of the dialogue feels very weird, and that's entirely based on the fact that the English voice actors had to sync their timing with the Japanese lips, which you can't really fault them for not making a good job at it.
What do you want to do?
When they didn't have to sync it, I think it absolutely sounds good. The voice lines from Tidus monologues is a great example of that.
I didn't belong with them. I'd be stuck in Spira, alone. And being alone in that place, well, I didn't want to think about it.
The soundtrack, however, is just god tier. There's just so many great themes available in the whole game, but the ones that really stuck with me are the more atmospheric towns and village themes, which I found to be quite peculiar, since in Final Fantasy 6 and 7, the themes I enjoy are usually mainly just the battle themes. But themes like Bisay Island and Side of Spira stir up something within me whenever I hear them. Not to say there aren't any good battle teams, there are 3 special battle teams that are just splendid. In fact, when I finished the game in camp, those 3 teams became my workout music, much to the chagrin of my buddies in camp. There are also of course the popular pieces like To Xenakon, Yuna's team, Hymn of the Faith, Tida's team, Someday the Dream Will End, etc. For this HD remaster, you can pick between an arranged and original soundtrack. I know there's quite a big debacle regarding which soundtrack is better, but I'll say I played through the game with the arranged soundtrack. They definitely managed to incorporate more instruments and variety, and overall it just sounds more modern. At the same time, I've gone back to listen to some of the original pieces, and I have to say whichever choice you pick for your playthrough, you can't go wrong. Both renditions are equally as amazing. Even though I enjoyed the game a lot, there are certainly quite a few negatives with the game. Firstly, it has to do with the cloister of trials. Periodically throughout the game, you need to go through a puzzle-filled dungeon environment in order to progress the story, and they are called the cloister of trials. These sections are a complete chore to go through. The puzzles in it are just terrible. Mainly you'll be taking a spear ball, walking with the spear ball, and finding a hole to put it in. Of course, there are also other elements present as well, but I don't even want to waste time explaining it. I wouldn't even blame you if you use a walkthrough to get through them. Secondly, the lack of quality of life updates in this remaster, such as not being able to skip cutscenes. Okay, you know I just said in the gameplay section that the boss battles are a highlight. You know what's not a highlight? Getting a game over and watching the same cutscenes again before fighting it. And if you get a game over, you have to watch the same cutscene again before fighting it. I don't know why they didn't update this. Just letting us skip cutscenes would have been an absolute godsend. Do take in mind that if you own the remaster on PC, you can mod the game for you to fast forward through the cutscenes. So yeah, definitely recommend doing that. Another thing is the lack of control over the random encounters. This game random encounters can be quite irritating at certain routes. It just never seems to stop sometimes. Plus, this was already a feature on the PC version, which makes the absence of these quality of life options very puzzling here on the Switch. Lastly, some of the mini games and completion requirements are just terrible. Chocobo racing, the control just feels bad, and you're almost certainly gonna get hit by the bird. Another one is dodging lightning bolts 200 times in a row. It is just not fun. I wanted to attempt to get the ultimate weapon, but I think after looking at some of the requirements, I just move on. It's just really not worth the effort to 100% complete the game. To summarize, Final Fantasy X has my favourite story out of the entire franchise, with extremely memorable scenes, well-written character developments, arguably the best party cast in any JRPGs, with very well realised setting and narrative themes. The presentation still holds up decently after 20 years, punctuated by an incredible soundtrack that makes you feel things. It also features the best turn-based combat system in any Final Fantasy game. The negatives are some bad design decisions like the pacing-breaking cloister of trial sections and terrible minigame mechanics. Also the lack of quality of life options pertaining to the ability to skip cutscenes or an easy way to set the random encounter rate. With all that being said, I'm giving Final Fantasy X a 10 out of 10. This is hands down my favourite full-length Final Fantasy game, absolutely in my top 10 games of all time. I think a lot of the reason why this game resonated with me so deeply is the fact that coming to this game, I had very low expectations of the game. I was already setting the game up for failure, but in the end, it managed to captivate me like no game ever did. So do I recommend this game? Absolutely. I share the same sentiment as many others that this is a great game to start for newcomers to the series. It really encompasses many elements that make Final Fantasy great. I would recommend the PC Remaster port for its quality of life updates and the ability to add mods. Personally, I still enjoyed the Switch port since I couldn't have finished the game if it wasn't portable. Anyways, I've been thinking if low expectations made me enjoy Final Fantasy X, maybe I should give Final Fantasy X-2 a shot as well. After all, I've heard many bad things about that game, about how it could have possibly ruined my enjoyment of X itself. Other than X-2, I've also recently purchased 12 the Zodiac Age, and I still have to play 9 at some point. So if you want to see me cover those games in the future, press the subscribe button. Anyway, since the 20th anniversary of Final Fantasy X, if you have any interesting experience with the game, do let me know in the comment section below. So long guys, so long.